One of the ushers will be more than happy to bring you one as we go to 2 Samuel chapter number 12. We've been continuing on with our overview of the books of history in the Old Testament, and we've been talking about David for several lessons, and now today we will talk about Absalom. Kind of take a break. We will get back to David next week. A lot of the books of history have to deal with David at its center point, but we're going to look today at Absalom as we go to 2 Samuel chapter number 12. 2 Samuel chapter 12. And we'll begin reading in verse number 11. It says, "Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this son. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun." And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. This morning we're talking about Absalom's rebellion. Absalom's rebellion came right on the heels of David's sin. Last week we talked about David's great sin in the sin with Bathsheba. And we see now here in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we see here the pronouncement by Nathan, the man of God, who comes and says, listen, because of the sin that you have sinned. Notice the verse again in verse 11. He says, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house. I believe that Absalom was the fulfillment of the prophecy here in verse number 11. That there would be trouble raised up out of David's own house. Even to the second part, not to go into details, but in the second part, even where he talks about that they would take his wives before the sun. And we find that that was something that Absalom did. His whole fulfillment of this prophecy, Absalom was a fulfillment of this prophecy. And the first paragraph here on our Sunday school handout says, The Scriptures tell us of many people who were wicked and rebellious. But I believe that there are few, if any, who were as rebellious as David's son, Absalom. What was it that made Absalom so rebellious? I believe that there were 5 things here that we're going to look at that really kind of caused Absalom's rebellion. The first one, we already have looked at the verses for. Number 1, Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his father's sin. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his father's sin. I believe his rebellion was in part a fulfillment of the prophecy of Nathan here. It was the fulfillment of the prophecy of Nathan, to where he came and he would be rebellious. And I believe that that stemmed, obviously, here in these verses from the sin of his father. Then number 2, or the second dot there, Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his unpunished sin. Go with me, if you would, to chapter 14 of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 21. As you're turning there, I know it's just a couple pages, but just to give some background, Absalom was David's son. Obviously, that part's been clear. Absalom had a sister who was wronged by one of his half-brothers, who then Absalom became very angry, and we're told here in the Scriptures that he would go and kill his brother. As you study the story of Absalom, there never was any punishment for Absalom for the killing of his brother. He invited all the king's sons to come, and he wanted the king to come to basically we could paraphrase here and say a party that he was throwing. And the king would not come, but the king's sons did. And among the king's sons, we find Amnon was the brother who had done wrong to Tamar, Absalom's sister. And Absalom would kill Amnon there on his threshing floor. We see here in 2 Samuel chapter 14, and look at verse number 21. It says, And the king said unto Joab, Behold, now I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. And Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, Today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. And Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, Let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. Absalom, after he killed Amnon, he fled and he went to stay with his mother's family in a different place. He would flee from David. He would flee from David's family. And we find that he had a desire to come back home again. He had a desire to come back, and he wanted to get David's attention. In order to get David's attention, he would go to David's general, Joab, and he went to Joab to try to get Joab to go and see the king on his behalf. If we know the story, and this, I'm going to tell the story here just to illustrate just how selfish Absalom was. When he could not get Joab's attention, he would send and he couldn't get his attention. Finally, he took and he set Joab's fields on fire. Now that's a way to get someone's attention. It's basically saying, hey, if you won't talk to me, I'm going to set your house on fire, or set your property on fire here, and then you'll come talk to me. Well, he was right in his selfishness. Joab then came and talked to him. I imagine Joab had a few things to say. But Joab came, and Absalom, being as charismatic as I believe he was, full of charisma and different things that he had, just in the ability to communicate with people, convinced Joab, despite the fact he just burned his field, to go and talk to David on his behalf. We find then that in this, Joab had come, spoke to David, and Absalom was allowed to return. Now David said, I don't want to see him. Let him go his own way. Don't bring him before me. But he let him come back. His sin was unpunished. His sin was unpunished. And we will kind of tie in the application to all these here towards the end. So we see, first of all, Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his father's sin. Secondly, Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his unpunished sin. Then thirdly here, Absalom's rebellion stemmed from unforgiveness. Look again at verse number 24 of 2 Samuel 14. Verse 24. And the king said, Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he pulled his head, for it was at every year's end that he pulled it, because the hair was heavy upon him, therefore he pulled it. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. We see here that he was allowed to come back, but he was not forgiven for his sin. His sin was unpunished, but he was not forgiven by David for his sin. I believe all these elements combined to build up the rebellious figure that we see as Absalom. Then we go to 2 Samuel chapter 18. 2 Samuel chapter number 18. And verse number 18. It says, Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it was called unto this day Absalom's place. I believe that Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his own pride. Stemmed from his own pride. He said, I don't have a son to remember my name, but he wanted his name to be remembered, so he reared up a place for himself and called it Absalom's place. He was a very prideful individual in many ways. We saw an example of that as well back in chapter 14. He made a show, I believe. The Bible talks about he pulled his head once a year and would weigh it just to see how much it weighed. He was very vain. He was very prideful in who he was. Then the next one here, number 5. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from rebellious companions. 2 Samuel chapter 17. 2 Samuel chapter 17. We'll go back a chapter here and let's go to verse number 1. We find here in 2 Samuel 17 that Absalom has come to overthrow the kingdom. He has basically chased David out. David went willingly, and his faithful followers went with him. Now Absalom, not satisfied with having the throne, wanted to pursue his father, wanted to annihilate any threat of his father coming back to take the throne again. We see in 2 Samuel chapter 17 that he had a partner in this. Moreover, Ahithophel said unto Absalom, Let me now choose out 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David this night. And I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, behold, and I will make him afraid, and all the people that are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only. And I will bring back the people unto thee. The man whom thou seekest is as if all returned, so all the people shall be in peace. He surrounded himself with others who were also rebellious. Ahithophel was one of the chief counselors of David. He had been loyal to David. Now I believe, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, that Absalom's rebellion stemmed from David's sin. Ahithophel's rebellion also stemmed from David's sin. You say, how would that be? Because Ahithophel had a granddaughter. You know what Ahithophel's granddaughter's name was? Bathsheba. He had a son-in-law, a grandson-in-law. His grandson-in-law's name was Uriah, whom David killed on the battlefield. So Ahithophel now, when the change of power comes, he sees his opportunity. He gathers with Absalom in rebellion and says, listen, send me out and let me go, and I'll tell you what, I will go and I'm only going to kill the king. That's all I'm after. He said, I'll just kill David. That's it. What was he doing? He was nursing his hatred for David. He was nursing his spite for David. This was who Absalom was with. Now understand this, as we take a look at this picture that we've painted. Time and time again, we see rebellion in our society. We see rebellion often with the younger generation as they're growing up and they're kind of teething, I guess we could say, on life, and they get those teeth pains. I don't know. Maybe I just have too many small children. I'm used to them having the baby starts crying, and I'm like, why is the baby crying? And my wife's like, he's teething. And it seems like nothing will help a teething baby. And I've had people give us all kinds of things, like those little bracelets that they chew on, or the teething toys, put it in the freezer, do this and that. And I don't know what works and what doesn't work, but it just seems like the baby always is crying, and it's always because they're cutting their teeth is what they're doing. And so, anyways, as young people grow up, they too have a tendency to try to break in their adulthood, if you will. As they do so, oftentimes rebellion begins to bulge up in their heart. What is it that causes young people, and sometimes it's not just young people. I've seen people who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s who are very rebellious. But often it seems like it's young people. What is it that causes young people to have rebellion stir in their heart? Now, I don't think as a parent there's anything we can do to 100% eliminate rebellion. That's their own heart, and we can't control their heart. They control their own heart, and God works in their heart. And sometimes, like Pharaoh, they have a heart of stone. There's not much you can do with it. But there are several things that we could look at here that I believe that probably showed a trend that was in Absalom's life up to this point, but we definitely see it in the verses we just read. We saw, first of all, number one on here, Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his father's sin. Always remember this, your children are watching you. Your children see what you do. And right or wrong, your children will use your actions as an excuse as to why they will do what they are doing. I don't know how often I hear young people say, well, I do this because my dad did this, or my mom did this, or I had an older sibling that did this. Someone's watching you. I have to remember this, as my children are growing up, they're watching me. And by the way, they see what I do. They see the good that I do. They see the bad that I do. No one in the world sees as much of my world as my wife and my children. And I would hate to think that I would put a stumbling block in my children's way to where they justify. Let me give you an example. Sometimes children growing up, they'll grow up and they'll have a bad temper. And they justify it, will say, well, my dad had a bad temper. Okay? But listen, so for me as a father, if I have a bad temper, and I always display a bad temper to my children, then when they get older and they display a bad temper, who are they imitating? Their father. Well, now I'm reaping the rewards of my own actions. David right here through Absalom truly was reaping the rewards of his own actions. He had sin. It was a fulfillment of the prophecy, and I understand that with us, it's not that we have a great sin like David had that we talked about last week, that there's a prophecy that our children will rise up against us, but so often it happens. So often it happens. And the first thing that we have to be careful of is make sure that they're not able to use us as the excuse for why they have so much rebellion in their heart. Then number 2, look at it here. We said Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his unpunished sin. I think there's a lot of rebellion in society today because there is a lack of discipline where discipline ought to be. I believe that in raising our children. Okay, we're talking about, especially here, the relationship between a parent and a child. In raising our children, there's a lack of discipline. There's a lack of discipline. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not for abusing children. I'm not for beating children, so to speak. But I do believe this. I believe there is something to being sure to make sure your children behave. Make sure your children are doing what's right. The Bible talks about that talks about the rod of correction. It says that if we forsake the rod of correction, that we truly hate our children. What is this? It's not a method of abuse. It's not a method of creating trauma in their world. But it is to discipline sin. See, even young. My children are all young. My oldest is 8 years old. Even young, I'm trying to teach my children, no, we don't talk like that. No, we don't talk to mom like that. No, I've got one of my boys who's going through that phase, and I've had just about all my boys are going through this phase at some point, to where they're like, just like, no. I had one of my boys look at my wife the other day, and she said, do your chores, and he's like, nope. Now, I'll tell you this. There's a beautiful thing about the fact that I live 2 blocks from the church. And I sat right in this office over here, and my wife gave me a call and said, your son, why is it my son? Your son is not listening. I said, tell him I'll be there in about 30 seconds. Get back in the car. Anybody watching the church probably thought I was nuts. Hop in the van, gone about 2 minutes, right back. When I left the house, you know what he was doing? His chore. What are you trying to teach them? You need to do what you're told to do. It's not okay. By the way, they start very young showing their rebellion. They start very young. I've got a little 1-year-old, Christopher. I call him Fiffer. I don't know why. It's just that's what Tiffany used to call him when she couldn't say Christopher, and so I thought it was cute, so I keep calling him Fiffer. He'll be 18, and I'll be going to his high school graduation, and I'll be calling him Fiffer. But anyways, Christopher, he's got this thing right now. You tell him to do something, he goes, ugh. You know what he's doing? He's showing rebellion. You say, oh, but it's so cute. You laugh at it now. You wait 10 years, and it's going to be so cute.
That's right.
He can't even talk yet. I'm like, and he's no. Why do they always learn no first? Why can't they ever learn yes first and then no? I want my children, and this is just something I do, and I think it's a good thing because I want my children to respect my wife and I. We teach our children, and maybe this is I lived in the South for enough years, maybe this comes from there, I don't know, but I was brought up, you tell your mom and dad, you say yes ma'am, yes sir, yes, no sir, no ma'am. You put that ma'am and that sir on there. Then I come up here and I do that to people, and they're like, I'm not a ma'am. I'm not a sir. Okay, well, yes, sir. Don't call me that. Yes, sir. But I teach my children. Say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, Christopher, he can't even talk yet. I say, yes, sir. You got that one down. Say, yes, ma'am. He gets his big eyes. Anyways. Why, though? You say, well, you're mean. No, I don't want them to be rebellious. When we leave sin unpunished, it does create a rebellion. Because, well, I got away with it last time, there's no reason I shouldn't get away with it now. By the way, kids will always get away with something. You can't stop all of it. But I can sure try. It keeps you busy. It keeps you on top of things. And so here's the thing, though. We have to be careful. I believe that unpunished sin stems rebellion. Then I think this is a big one here, number 3. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from unforgiveness. Not his unforgiveness, but from unforgiveness. We don't know much in Scripture about what David and Absalom's relationship was like until the incident with Amnon was the first time that you start seeing anything about Absalom. I don't know what it was like for them growing up, but I know this. I don't think forgiveness reigned in their relationship because Amnon sinned and Absalom could not forgive. I understand it was a big sin. It was a big crime. But Absalom could not forgive. Instead, he struck back in spite. When he struck back, David could not forgive. Again, we're talking about big things here. I understand that. We're talking about, we're not talking about just they didn't pick up their room, okay? We're talking about big things. I understand that. But there was a lack of forgiveness. And by the way, back to what we were talking about before, not picking up your room, it grows. It grows. It grows to where that rebellion stems. I believe it begins at home and it begins to spread to school and it begins to spread to authorities and it begins to spread even in Sunday school and at the church and things. And if it's not curbed at some point, it will spread to law enforcement and it will spread to society. And listen, there are a whole lot of people in jail this morning that are rebels because their rebellion wasn't curbed when they were young. There are a lot of people in prison this morning because they could not curb their rebellion, and no one curbed their rebellion growing up. I'm not saying everyone there is like that, but I think there's probably a lot of them that are. But it starts with that small things. But just like we have to punish the small sins of our small children, we also have to forgive. There should be forgiveness. Jesus said to forgive. Peter said, if my brother sins against me, should I forgive him 7 times? You remember what Jesus said? No, 70 times 7. By the way, that doesn't mean that 70 times 7, I've drawn a blank on what that even is. Brother Andrew, you're smart. 490? Brother Hickman. I'm getting to who all the math people are here. All right. 490 times. That doesn't mean you count 490 times and you say, all right, 491, we're done. All right. The focus was not on the number. The focus was on you keep forgiving. Be long-suffering. By the way, as parents, we have to be forgiving of our children. We start forgiving them when they're young. Because, by the way, the offenses when they're young are only going to get bigger and more personal and more hurtful as they get older. And so, learn to forgive when they're young. Why? Because as they go to each stage, there's going to be things that you have to forgive. Yet David could not forgive. And I believe it just fueled Absalom's rebellion. If you go from step to step in Absalom's life, he would come back and he was not forgiven by David right away. Eventually he would be received after Joab again got involved. Got Joab to, and I think I might have gotten to that place. I think he burned his field actually before the second time that he came. But anyhow, he would finally come see his face. But by this time Absalom was bitter. Absalom was so bitter to the point that he would eventually go stand outside the palace and say, hey, the king has no time to see you today, but I'll see you. The king has no time for you. Your matter is small before the king, but it matters to me. By the way, this is how he won the hearts of the people. He turned the hearts of the people away from the king to him. Why? Because he was a rebel. And I believe part of that came from the unforgiveness. The unforgiveness they experienced. By the way, when we are come back to the home, okay, when we don't forgive as we should forgive, then that rebel will seek to turn the hearts of everyone else in that household. Because that's what a rebel does. That's what Absalom did. So the king doesn't care. Eventually you'll have children that stand outside the door of your house, if you will, and say, well, hey, dad doesn't care. Hey, mom doesn't care, but I care about your problem. Hey, I'm using the home setting this morning. I think that's the most applicable here that we're looking at, but you could take other settings as well for the same thing. Where does his rebellion come from? It came first from David's sin, from what he saw his father do. Then from unpunished sin. Then from a lack of forgiveness. Then from a pride. from his own pride. 2 Samuel 18:18, we looked at it already. But Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his own pride. One thing every rebel I've ever met has in common. You know what it is? They know what's best. Always. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. It takes a good deal of humility, and there's a reason why the book of Proverbs, which was written to young men to build the principles in their life, there's a reason why it says in the multitude of counselors there is safety. By wise counsel make thy war. The Bible tells us that we ought to be humble enough to seek advice and seek counsel of others. I've told this story before, and we're doing fine for time. I've told this story before, but when I was going to go to Bible college, they had what was called homeroom counselors, and they said, you're going to meet with a counselor every week. And I was like, oh my goodness. I said, I don't want to meet with a counselor. I was like, my dad's a pastor. I was like, I can talk to my dad if I've got any issues. I was like, I've got the Bible. I was like, I don't need any counselors. And almost just as soon as we got back from our college visit and I got back home here, I was reading in Proverbs, and it seemed like everywhere it stood out. In the multitude of counselors there is safety. By wise counsel, make thy war. All the verses in Proverbs kept popping out at me about counsel. I went to college and I decided, I need counsel. I talked to my homeroom counselors. They're good men. They gave me good sound counsel most of the time. But they gave me good sound counsel. I had set up what I called my cabinet of counselors. I had only 2 groups of people that I'd said, anything they tell me to do, I'm going to do it no matter what I think. You know who that was? First of all, my parents. If I said, hey, I want to do this, and my parents said, no, I don't think that's a good idea, I listened to them. Even though I was 20 and 21 and 22. I did that all the way till I got married. After I got married, I stopped listening to them. No, I'm just kidding. The second one was my pastor in college. Pastor Bob Gray was the pastor I had in college. And Bob Gray II. And I say, anything he tells me to do, if I think differently, but he says he thinks I should do this, I'm going to do that. By the way, I had good counselors. And where I went in life to this point, following their counsel, I'll tell you what, it's been good. It's been good. I don't think there is anything I could look back to and say, wow, I really wish I wouldn't have listened to them. I remember I was getting ready to graduate college. I had Brother Miller will remember that old 1991 Ford F-150, straight 6. When I went to college, Brother and Miss Miller gave me that truck, and it was a blessing. And it was a real blessing. It had a great engine. Clutch, I learned how to drive a clutch in that thing, and burned up the clutch. I had to put a new clutch in it. They gave it to me. Like, we put a brand new clutch in it. 2 years later, I'm putting a new clutch in it. we took care of that new clutch. Anyways, and I was getting ready, and I'm like, Dad, listen, everything under the sun has happened to this truck while I've been down here. I've been hit by a steamroller. I have had the clutch pin fell out and nobody can fix it. I'm like, it's rusting out on the corners. I'm like, Dad, I need a car. And I'm getting ready to graduate. I'm like, Dad, let me, I said, I can go. I didn't understand how it all worked. But I was like, I can go get a car. I said, this truck, I told him, I said, this truck's never going to make it back to Nebraska. And my dad's like, son, he's like, that truck will make it back just fine. He said, the longer you can go without having a car payment, the better. I said, but Dad, I said, and so I hung up the phone. I tell you what, I was mad. I said, he doesn't have to drive this piece of junk. No offense to the gift y'all gave me. They gave it to me in good shape. But after 4 years of college, it wasn't in good shape anymore. I had passengers, to them to get out, I had to get out, walk around, and open the door because the inside latch was not broken. But it's like, he doesn't have to drive this piece of junk. It's like, wow. But I followed the rule I always had. I listened. I was tempted. I even pulled in the car lot with that truck one day. That is the worst experience I ever had in a car lot in my life. This guy came out. He met me as I was getting out. I'd never seen anything like it. He met me at a Kia dealership down in Longview, Texas. And I stepped out and he's like, hello. And I'm like, well, where'd you come from? He's like, is this what you're trading in today? And I said, maybe. He said, hold on. He said, I'm going to get my manager. And there was like, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. I got back in my truck, and I kid you not, the Lord is my witness. I'm pulling out, and he is running out with his manager. Hey! I thought, man, sales must be bad. So I got back on the loop, and I was like, I'm never going back there again. But that truck made it back just fine. I went a long time with being able to drive that truck. Caught on fire one day. And I was dating my wife. And it was several months before we got married. I don't think we were engaged yet, but we were seriously dating. And I was driving one day, leaving work, and it caught on fire. You probably remember this, Brother Miller. It caught on fire. Fortunately, there was a fire truck behind me. I pulled over. The fire truck pulled around, and they put out the fire in my truck. My dad came and picked me up. He said, "Son, I think you need to get a car." I was like, yes! I've never regretted listening to counselors. But so often our young people, they feel very prideful. Well, I know what I need. I know what I want. And this is right where Absalom was. By the way, he knew what he wanted. He wanted the throne. That's what he wanted. He was a rebel. All right, next. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his rebellious companions. When someone is a rebel, they're going to do this. They're going to always seek out other rebels. Ahithophel was already a rebel before Absalom came along. But they gravitated to each other because they had one common purpose, and that was to rebel against the king. A rebel always will surround themselves with other rebels. I believe this is true. And then they fuel each other's rebellion. If you have someone that you know and you can tell they're a rebel, don't hang around them because it will wear off. If they're always talking down the authorities, or they're talking down the boss at work, or they're talking down the pastor at church, or they're talking about their Sunday school teacher, talking them down, they're talking down their parents, they're talking down every authority that they've ever had in their life, then I'll tell you this, that should be a red flag to say, I don't think I want to be with them. I don't think I want, by the way, Ahithophel got so stressed from his relationship that he went out and hung himself. That's not a good end. And you will regret being a close companion to rebels. Always. Always. All right, going on to the back. This is the section here on the bottom at first. In this confused society that we live in, rebellion has been labeled as the mere expression of one's individuality. However, the Lord takes a much dimmer view of a spirit of rebellion that rears its head in our hearts. We got 3 of these on the back, okay? Number 1, the Scripture calls rebellion sin. The Scripture calls rebellion sin. Job 34:37 says, "For he addeth rebellion unto his sin. He clappeth his hands among us, and multiplieth his words against God." It is not just a healthy expression of one's individuality, but it always accompanies sin, and it says it's added to it, and I believe this, it is sin. It is sin. And as a matter of fact, the very next one, the Scriptures equate rebellion to witchcraft. Witchcraft is your blank. You probably didn't think you were going to come to church and write that out today. Witchcraft is there. It says in 1 Samuel 15:23, "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king." 1 Samuel 15 is talking about King Saul. He was also a rebel. He had shown his rebellion. And Samuel came and told him, listen, your rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. It is literally the devil's work. And I believe this. I believe rebellion is the devil's work. I believe that rebellion is the devil's work to try to keep you from those who could help you the most. And the last one here. Rebellion hinders success. Rebellion hinders success. Psalm 68:6. God setteth the solitary in families. He bringeth out those which are bound with chains. But the rebellious dwell in a dry land. You want to be successful in life? Rebellion is not going to help you be successful. It says right here that the rebellious dwell in a dry land. There's a lack of prosperity with rebellion. When we feel like we know exactly where we're going and we won't listen to anybody else and we won't be humble enough to hear anyone else and what they have to say, we will wind up driving the car right off the cliff. We will wind up wrecking our future of what it could be and the goodness we could have had and dwell in a dry land. So always remember this. Rebellion is not good. It is not good. Absalom, it was not good for him. His end would come to the point to where he literally died hanging from a tree with his hair. And Joab, whom he had used as his friend many times, actually came and stuck the darts in his heart that killed him. It didn't pay off for him to be a rebel. By the way, it never does pay off to live in rebellion. And so we're going to go ahead. We have got, we're doing good. We're doing good. We got a few minutes here to do our review. Brother Tim, if you want to get that set up out there, brother, that would be great. And Miss Sarah, why don't you come? Okay. We said Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his father's what? Yes, Miss Pam. Sin. Absolutely. Stemmed from his father's sin. Number 2. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his what? The second one. His blank sin. Yes, Miss Kane. Unpunished sin. Very good. This side's got 2 points. You are like, I didn't know we'd keep a score. All right, number 3. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from blank. Miss Audra. Unforgiveness. Very good. Number 4. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from his own blank. Yes, Miss Maddie. Pride. From his own pride. Number 5. Absalom's rebellion stemmed from blank companions. Yes, Miss Pam. Rebellious, yes. I know everybody knows these. It just comes down to who wants to raise their hand. All right, we got 3 on the back here. Ready? The scriptures call rebellion what? I heard somebody say it. Was that you, Brother Vern? Sin, yes. Number 2. The scriptures equate rebellion to Miss Evelyn. Witchcraft, yes. And last one. Rebellion hinders what? Yes. Success. Sorry, I should have said Miss Charity. All right, they both got it. Give them both a piece of candy there, all right? Hey, let's go ahead. We're going to get ready to pray. We'll be dismissed. There is coffee and snacks out there again. And by the way, there's Mountain Dew this time, okay? I forgot the Mountain Dew this morning, but it's there, right, brother? It's there for you. You look like you probably need 2 Mountain Dews this morning. Anyways, but it'll be out there. And the morning service will start here at 11. Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll be dismissed. Dear Lord, I thank you for today. Thank you for the time, dear Lord, that we have to be in Sunday school. And thank you for the lesson, the example that we see from this Absalom, dear Lord, and the relationship that he had with David. And just, dear Lord, what caused the rebellion in his heart. I pray, dear Lord, that as we go forward, that you would help our hearts to be pure, to be clean, dear Lord, as it should be. Help us to be free from pride, dear Heavenly Father, in all that we do. Help us not to be rebellious in our own spirits, dear Lord, please. Pray now that you'd be at the morning service here to follow. Put your hand upon it now. We ask it in your name. Amen. You are dismissed. Thank you very much.